Let's go right to NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC's Julie Sirkin at the Capitol, and congressional reporter for The Hill, Michael Schnell. Julie, despite the partisan bickering on this overnight session, things are moving forward. Where are we in this process?
They're moving forward, Anna, but not nearly as fast enough in the direction that Mike Johnson wants them to move. And that is because it seems like with those changes that they made overnight that you alluded to appease the moderates, I'm talking about the state and local tax deduction, raising that cap that was only put in place during the 2017 tax cuts signed into law by President Trump. Because that cap has now moved up, the offer on the table to $40,000 for those making under $500,000 a year in New York and California and those blue states where Republicans, of course, are able to make that House majority happen. Because of that, you have hardliners who are saying this bill just got worse overnight. You have two of them who sit on the Rules Committee. That is why when you heard some of the Democrats talk about those backroom negotiations that are happening, that's actually Speaker Johnson trying to backchannel and talk with Chip Roy, with Ralph Norman, two folks who at this point, at this juncture, are no's. But it's not just them, right? It's also Andy Harris, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, and Speaker Johnson saying moments ago that not only are they not going to put this bill on the floor guaranteed today, but now it's just a chance that they do that, Anna.
It doesn't sound very optimistic in terms of what's happening in this moment. Michael, we mentioned only 3 Republicans can vote no. And so Speaker Johnson has to keep pretty much his entire caucus in line to go along to get this passed. What are you hearing about related to the holdouts right now?
Yeah, well, certainly now there are far more than just 3 Republicans who are against this bill. And if it were put on the floor within the next 5 minutes, they're saying that they would vote no. The main qualm, one of them right now, as Julie pointed out, is the fact that Speaker Johnson overnight struck an agreement with those moderate Republicans from high tax blue states on the SALT deduction cap, raising it to $40,000 for individuals making $500,000 or less. The only problem with that is that it may be an agreement among the moderates, but the hardliners are showing that they don't want to get on board. Andy Harris, the chairman of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, was on television earlier today and said that he is not happy with that deduction cap. He thinks that a number of conservatives are now opposed to where things stand because that cap was increased. So these are the dynamics that Johnson's been having to grapple with for weeks now, not just on this bill, but on all legislative undertakings. It's weighing those concerns among moderates, as Julie mentioned, the majority makers, people whose seats in purple districts are really the reason why Republicans have the majority, in addition to hardline Republicans who know how to make noise and they like to make noise. In terms of these holdouts, I spoke to Congressman Chip Roy, he Republican from Texas, just a few minutes ago. He was actually leaving that House Rules Committee meeting that you're showing right now on the screen. He told me things are, quote, not good right now. And when I asked if he's supportive, he said, I'm a no.
I have a feeling there are people out there saying, what is up with this SALT tax? Like, it's not something that I'm real familiar with, because the people in the Northeast are certainly familiar with it, but it's not something that is a big deal for other people in other states. So just for those viewers who are with us right now, it's the state and local tax. And people used to be able to deduct like the entirety of their property taxes from their tax returns as they're going through the process of filing those returns. The trouble is they can't do that all the way in some cases. And so it's right now capped at $10,000, which sounds like a lot for people. But we know in the Northeast, it can be tens of thousands of dollars that people are paying in property taxes. So just trying to reiterate, that's why it's such a huge sticking point for some of these important Republican votes right now. Garrett, how confident is the White House that, after the president's meeting with House Republicans, this is going to pass? Is he doing anything more to try to get it across the finish line?
Anna, I've asked that question today. I think it's likely we'll probably see the president make phone calls to individual members, because that has what has been the kind of key to unlocking support for several other votes along the way during this administration. The White House is confident, they're always confident, that they can ultimately lean on enough Republicans to get these things across this first finish line. Remember, this is nowhere close to the end of the road for this bill. But if you look back at things like the Speaker's vote and some of these other difficult votes along the way, you've ultimately had the president, sometimes while the votes are open, calling individual members to lean on them to vote yes. They have been successful in those tactics up until this point, there's always a sort of a counterfactual moment that happens along the way in administrations. But, I covered the Hill for a long time before moving over here. These things always take longer than leadership and then the White House would like. But the president has one tool at his disposal with these big reconciliation bills. This is essentially everything that all of these Republicans ran on in 2024, and for the House in particular, hope to run on again in 2026, and they cannot end up with nothing to show for it. And so I think the White House's view is that this will ultimately get to a good place, but it may take longer than they'd like.
Julie, let's talk more about what's in the bill. Trillions in tax cuts, billions in cuts to healthcare spending, food assistance, clean energy, an increase in defense and immigration spending, the promised no tax on tips policy, and much, much more. Which of these provisions are more or less set in stone on the House side, at least for now?
Well, I would say all of them are set in stone, minus SALT, minus Medicaid, and minus the clean energy tax credits, which are the biggest parts of this bill. And that is because when it comes to Medicaid, for example, we reported yesterday that President Trump told Republicans behind closed doors, don't F around with Medicaid, stop touching it. And that is because hardliners, including a group of them that just passed moments ago and entered the Speaker's office, want more reforms. They want federal governments to, in some cases, help states less when it comes to the expanded version of Medicaid. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that this could lead to millions of Americans losing their health care coverage when it comes to clean energy tax credits. For example, moderates are also worried about that because a lot of these projects already started in their districts, and now they're going to see that potentially go backwards. So a lot still to figure out here. Speaker Johnson wants to vote on this later tonight. He's got to get moving.
And Michael, this bill could have major economic impacts. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office finds as soon as 2027, this bill would worsen financial conditions for the bottom 10% of households and increase finances for the top 10% of households. Pocketbook issues, that was a top priority for voters. Are Republicans not expecting political blowback if this passes?
Well, Anna, interestingly enough, this was one of the dynamics that we had been following in the Capitol in recent days. The question of, would Republicans vote on this bill without first having that report from the Congressional Budget Office? Now, we sort of had bits and pieces of the CBO's report on this bill. It's a sprawling piece of legislation, more than 1,000 pages, but we're starting to get a clearer picture of what this legislation would actually do, what impact it would have in the years to come. Now, Democrats are surely going to seize on this and use this as a campaigning tactic as we head into 2026. We've already seen that. In fact, Democrats latching on to some of the CBO's predictions about how many millions of Americans would lose their Medicaid coverage if the provisions of this bill would go into effect. We're also likely to see some Republicans talk about some parts, specifically the impact on the deficit. Hardline Republicans have said it's their red line that they won't support a bill unless it's deficit neutral or deficit reducing. Some of these numbers in the CBO report could turn them off, though I will say Republicans do have a track record of sometimes saying that they don't believe the numbers from the CBO.
That's a good point. And Garrett, Julie just mentioned President Trump apparently warned Republicans, do not mess with Medicaid. But this CBO says the bill will cut hundreds of billions of dollars, not only from Medicaid, but also Medicare. How's the White House defending that?
Yeah, look, I mean, the White House's argument here is that they're essentially returning Medicaid to what it was meant to be, health care for the poorest and most vulnerable among us, and that by instituting these work requirements, they are fixing Medicaid, not cutting Medicaid. I think by any, standard understanding of the English language, that's just spin. I mean, the president would like to be quoted saying that he's urging people not to touch Medicaid, but the numbers are the numbers, and the projections of millions of people losing coverage cannot be ignored, no matter how you try to shape the conversation, let's say, to your liking on it.